on the computer. Hello and welcome back to Talking Capitalism. Today we are talking capitalism with my good friend Jenna Marshall, who is a lecturer in international studies at King's College in London, where they have to get all of their stuff in a year in advance. Very different from us here in Eastern Canada. So Jenna does awesome research for those of you who aren't familiar with her work. She does great work on history of race and imperialism, historical political economy, plantation economics. She's a co-convener of the colonial, post-colonial, and decolonial working group of the British International Studies Association, one of the foremost generators of all the critical thinking in anti-colonial research in the English-speaking world. And we are very lucky to have her with us for a couple minutes today. Welcome, Jenna. Thanks for participating.
Thank you so much, AJ. That was such a generous introduction. But yeah, I'm happy to be here.
All right. Thank you. So our first question is, just tell us a little bit about yourself. Tell us about kind of how you came to understand capitalism in your life and in your work.
Yeah, that's a really great question. I would say intergenerationally. I came to not necessarily an understanding, but I was a bit interested in capitalism, looking specifically at my history, my personal history, looking at the life that my grandmother led, the types of opportunities, or should I say lack thereof. Then looking at my mother's generation and the opportunities she had, and then myself. And I was really interested in the continuity and the change materially at that stage of my, I guess, coming to terms with capitalism. It was like, how did, in 3 generations, our opportunities, our access to education, to knowledge, to financing, how did it change so, overwhelmingly? And that led me down the path of development studies. So I really focused. So the way I came to capitalism, at least in a scholarly focus, was through development. It was like the vector through which to make sense of capitalism. And that was notably in my graduate work at master's level. However, I found, at least with development as a problematic or as a way of thinking about aid relationships and particular interventions, typically the global north into the global south, I felt that it was a bit too instrumentalist and technocratic, and I wanted a bit more in terms of understanding, again, that intergenerational changes that I saw and that I learned about, from my family history, and also in the community as well. So for my PhD, I had 2 amazing supervisors, and it actually led me towards an intellectual inheritance from my home. So previously, the graduate work was predominantly what we call today Eurocentric traditions of knowledge. And the PhD allowed me the opportunity to gravitate towards my home, not simply as this empirical site for testing theories, but a place that had an inheritance of knowledge about itself, and that this knowledge was valid, and that I could use this knowledge and this grounding these communities as ways to theorize, not just about my family and my community, but theorize about the world. So that was like the major shift for me.
That's a huge shift, hugely important shift. Maybe you could share with folks who may not know where your home is, actually. So.
Oh, yes. Sorry about that. Yeah. So I'm from the Caribbean, specifically Barbados. And I believe we were the first British colony in the New World. Right. So we were actually a testing ground for a lot of Atlantic slavery, the racial codes were essentially invented in Barbados and then exported actually to the United States of America and throughout the Caribbean region. So the island itself actually plays a really interesting role in thinking about the creation of modernity, the modern capitalist system. Yeah.
Absolutely. And that kind of dovetails nicely into where we're going with the next questions, which is about the excellent article that you shared with us, talking about plantations, talking about reparations, the history of Barbados. So I wonder if you could share with us kind of why is this piece a significant one for you and for students to engage with?
Okay, so there are a couple of reasons, but I think I'll focus primarily on three.
Mm-hmm.
I think what the article speaks to is the fact that capitalism isn't simply an economic system,
Mm-hmm.
It's a social system. And it is a social system imbued with violence. At every turn, the capitalist system is an inherently violent one.
Mm-hmm.
And I think then to speak to that violence allows us to then grapple with the questions of slavery, indentureship, even reproductive labor in a different way, right? We start to see them then as part and parcel of, surplus value extraction.
Mm-hmm.
And I think it then offers us a question as to why we don't know a lot about enslavement, right? When debating about capitalism, even historically or contemporarily. So that brings us to my second point, which is what the article also shows us is that there has been a sustained project of historical erasure
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
in how we understand, this creation of the modern global system. We've negated and we've suppressed so much knowledge about ourselves and ourselves in relation to these global systems. And I found it really interesting in the article when the poet laureate, she said, "Oh, I didn't even know."
Right.
I and she lives there. This is her grounding, and there was so much about her own biography that she just was not aware of. So I think that's the second point. And the third point that the article doesn't really bring out, but I think it's important to mention because it relates to the first point I made about violence,
Mm-hmm.
is the fact that if capitalism is inherently a violent system, it's a system about struggle. That means then it's also a system about resilience and resistance. And when we see even contemporarily with the Indian farmers' protest, when we see Black Lives Matter, when we see these eruptions and conflagrations, it's actually in response to capitalist violence.
Mm-hmm.
So we have to then understand that, what's the word? We have to understand that back and forth, that interdependence between that violence and that resistance when thinking about capitalism.
Thank you for that. It makes so much sense. If we can agree that a system is systemically violent, then obviously, resistance and resilience has to be like such a foundational part of that. Jenna, it's possible that students will not always remember every single thing that we talk about in this class, even though I think they obviously need to. But I like to ask guests towards the end of our discussion, if there's just one thing that you think first-year students of capitalism need to understand and take with them wherever they go in life, what would be the kind of one takeaway that they need to keep in mind?
Oh, wow. You have to distill it. Okay. The one thing about capitalism, yeah?
Yeah.
Okay. The one thing I would really like students to take away from your amazing module that you're convening and designing is the dynamism of capitalism. It's an it's an incredibly dynamic system. And it's interesting because the work of Marx, you know, he doesn't offer us this roadmap to a socialist utopia. His whole life's work is bound up with like a rich articulation of the dynamism that is capitalism, right? As a way to challenge it, right? We're trying to challenge it. And I think the only way we can challenge this dynamism is to then offer our own conceptual and theoretical understandings of it, and to know that it's forever changing, it's forever adapting, it's conscripting new subjects and dispelling those deemed, you know, disposable. So if we bear in mind that dynamism, I think the students would really benefit from that.
Thank you so much, Dr. Marshall. We have been talking capitalism with Jenna Marshall. Join us again next week when we talk to somebody else.
Bye.
Bye. Thank you.